She looked in the mirror, and I don't know why, but she said his name the last time.
Candyman.
She turned out the lights.
Nightmare Files.
In 1992, the world was introduced to a new legend. In 2021, a new version of the sadistic legend will be released. Those who think that the movie is pure fiction are highly mistaken. The real stories behind the legend may not be supernatural, but they are just as chilling as anything the movie could ever depict. These are the true stories behind the iconic movie, Candyman.
He's the worst serial killer in Houston history, Dean Corll, known as the Candyman.
It's one of Houston's most coveted neighborhoods.
Everything we did, we walked, we played outside.
It's a terrible thing and it should have never taken place.
They had no idea he was murdered by Dean Corll, a serial killer known as the Candyman.
Came for you.
Candyman.
Built in the middle part of the last century, the Grace Abbott homes, high-rises in Chicago, were home to a melting pot of people. You had drug addicts, those down on their luck, and the mentally ill, career criminals. They were all in the same place. On April 22nd, 1987 at 8:45 p.m., Ruthie Mae McCoy called the police in a panic. She told the operator that an intruder had threw her cabinet down. She was fearful that this intruder was out to get her and wanted the police to intervene. The operator, not able to really make sense of Ruthie's call, logged it as a disturbance with a neighbor and had a car attend the scene. Between 9:02 p.m. and 9:04 p.m., two other neighbors called the police, both reporting hearing gunshots in room 1109, Ruthie's apartment number. Police arrived at 9:10 p.m. They knocked on Ruthie's door and called her phone. No answer. So they left. It wasn't until 2 days later that the door was broken down and Ruthie Mae McCoy was found dead, shot 4 times. Also, her bathroom cabinet was missing, revealing a large crawl space behind it. This was how the real-life Candyman entered apartments. When the projects had been designed, all of the pipes were connected through a crawl space behind the bathroom walls. These were accessed by removing the bathroom cabinets, making it really easy for repairs. But it also made it really easy for people to break in. But who killed Ruthie Mae McCoy? The apartment next to Ruthie Mae McCoy's was 1108. Fellow residents Edward Turner and John Hondras had been there that day hanging out. A friend allegedly showed them how easy it was to break into the apartment next door, using the bathroom cabinet as access. Tim Brown, the main witness during the trial against Turner and Hondras in 1990, told the court that he had seen them break into apartment 1109 and then heard several gunshots. Turner and Hondras then left through the front door of 1109 carrying a TV, a rocking chair before disappearing. A few hours later, they allegedly returned to clear up the spent shell casings from the apartment. Turner's girlfriend testified that later that night, he had bragged to her about shooting someone. Hondras' girlfriend admitted that they had left her with a rocking chair and a TV for safekeeping. Edward Turner testified in his own defense. He stated that he was in 1108 when he heard gunshots and ran down to the lobby. 30 minutes later, John Hondras came down alone. Going back to 1108, they saw a TV sitting outside 1109 and a third man carrying a rocking chair out of Ruthie Mae's apartment. Turner took a look in and saw a dead body in the bedroom. At this point, the third man left the rocking chair and went away, leaving the TV and the rocking chair with Turner and Hondras. Neither denied trying to stash the stolen items with others, but they sure denied killing Ruthie. With no physical evidence to tie them to the crime, they were acquitted and found not guilty. To this day, the real-life Candyman has never been caught. Thankfully, those projects have all been torn down. To everyone in his Houston neighborhood, Dean Corll seemed like a decent, ordinary man. He was known for spending most of his time at the small candy factory that his mother owned, and he got along well with many of the neighborhood kids. He even gave free candy to local school children, which earned him the nickname Candyman. But behind his sweet smile, Dean had a dark secret. He was a serial killer who murdered at least 28 young men in the early 1970s. This horrific spree would later be dubbed as the Houston Mass Murders, and it wasn't until Dean himself was killed in 1973 that the truth came out. And shockingly, the person who murdered Dean was his own accomplice, a young teenage boy whom he had groomed to help him with his murder spree. In the mid-1950s, Dean Corll's mother and stepfather started a candy company called Pecan Prince, initially working from the family garage. From the very start, Dean played a crucial role in the company. While his stepfather sold the candy on his sales route and his mother managed the actual business, Dean and his younger brother operated the machines that produced the candy. By the time his mother divorced her second husband, Dean had spent several years working at the candy shop. At some point, Dean briefly returned to Indiana to care for his widowed grandmother. But by 1962, he was ready to come back to Texas and help his mother with a new venture. Now called the Corll Candy Company, Dean's mother started this revamped business in the Houston Heights area. Unsurprisingly, she named Dean the vice president and his younger brother the secretary-treasurer. Although Dean was drafted in the U.S. Army in 1964 and served for about 10 months, he successfully applied for a hardship discharge after explaining that he needed to help his mother at her store. And so for several more years, Dean continued to work at the candy company, presumably bringing joy to his customers. Before the crimes, there were warning signs of what could be coming. For instance, one young teenage boy who worked at the company complained to Dean's mother that Dean had said inappropriate things to him, but rather than questioning Dean, his mother simply fired the boy. Meanwhile, the candy factory itself seemed to attract several teenage boys, both as employees and as customers. Some of them were runaways or troubled youths. Dean quickly built up a rapport with these teens. In September 1970, Dean killed his first victim. By this point, his mother had divorced the third husband and moved to Colorado, but Dean stayed behind in Houston since he had found a new job as an electrician. Dean also moved where he would begin to commit horrific crimes in his early 30s, but he wouldn't stay there for long. During the Houston mass murders, he would frequently move between apartments and rent houses, sometimes staying in one spot for just a few weeks. His first recorded victim was Jeffrey Conan, an 18-year-old student who was hitchhiking from Austin to Houston. Conan was believed to have been looking for a way to get to his girlfriend's house, and Dean likely picked him up with an offer of a ride. Just a few months later in December, Dean abducted 2 more teenage boys and tied them to his bed in his home. He was in the process of doing something horrific when suddenly one of his friends, Brooks, walked in on him. Dean then made some disturbing confessions to Brooks. One of the boys Brooks brought to Dean was Emerald Henley, because Brooks would always bring people to him. But for some reason, Dean decided not to dispose of him. Instead, he groomed Henley to participate in his sickening scheme, offering him cash as a reward for help for finding victims. Henley later said, "Dean told me he would pay me $200 for every guy that I could bring in, and maybe more if they were really good looking." In reality, Dean usually paid the boys just $5 or $10. Henley has insisted that he initially refused the offer, but his family's financial hardship led him to accept it. But even when he was paid far less than he had hoped, he didn't back out. Eerily, he seemed almost flattered to be included. Together, in the early 1970s, Brooks and Henley would help the Candyman killer by luring in his victims. The three used Dean's GTX muscle car or his white van to convince victims to come with them, using candy, alcohol, or drugs to get them inside. Dean and his accomplices would take the victims to his home. Dean also forced them to write postcards to their families to say they were okay. Each victim would often be tied to a wooden board. Brooks would later describe Henley as being especially sadistic. After nearly 3 years and 28 known victims, Dean turned on Henley on August 8, 1973. On that day, Henley had lured in 2 teens, Tim Curley and Rhonda Williams, to Dean's house. Williams was the only girl known to have been targeted during the spree, but Henley later insisted that she wasn't targeted by him. Instead, they were supposedly all there to party. From drinking heavily to huffing paint to get high, they all fell asleep earlier than expected. When Henley woke up, he discovered that he was tied up alongside Curley and Williams, and Dean was screaming at Henley while waving his .22 caliber pistol, saying, "I'm gonna kill you, but first, I'll have my fun." Dean then carried Henley into the kitchen to let him know just how furious he was that he had brought a girl over at his home. Henley pleaded with Dean to untie him, saying that the 2 of them could kill both Williams and Curley together. Eventually, Dean did untie Henley and brought Curley and Williams into the bedroom to be tied up to the wooden board. In doing so, Dean needed to put his gun down. Williams, who survived the attack and only spoke publicly about it in 2013, recalled that Dean's behavior had visibly shaken something in Henley's mind. He stood at my feet and just all of a sudden told Dean this couldn't keep going on. He couldn't let him keep killing his friends, and that it had to stop. That's what she recalled. And then Dean looked up, and he was surprised. So he started getting up, and he was like, "You're not going to do anything to me." Then without another word, Henley shot Dean, killing him. And with that, the Houston mass murders by the Candyman finally came to an end. Based loosely, but definitely referenced, these were the true stories behind the iconic Candyman.